Hi, it's Cole from Cole's Quilts, and I'm here in my in-progress sewing studio to make a video about how the Santa quilt-along has now begun. I decided to make a video to talk a little bit about choosing fabrics and how this pattern is going to work. It's a little bit like the Kaleidoscope Owl, but some of the descriptors I'm using are a little bit different, and so I think I might just put a little bit more information in this video. Also, I am not necessarily going to make a video for the whole process, but I may make a video each time we get to a part of the quilt that maybe is a little different and more complex. So this first part, I don't know why, but I usually, when I write blocks, I start either at the top or the bottom and work in rows, but I think I'm going to do this in columns. So I'm going to go top to bottom, column A, and then column B, and then column C. I decided on 5 blocks a week. And so these first 5 blocks are all the background, which is essentially a Christmas tree that's sort of blurry with Christmas tree lights. So I'm going to show you some information about how you can choose some of those. And then when we get to the section where we start doing some of his face, I'll do a different video for that. All of the background and a chunk of part of Santa is mostly the same block, which is a little bit like the frog quilt along, where the blocks are the same unless there's a part where I had to, for the sake of the picture, sort of change things around. So when you start getting to features of his face, it's going to be more complex. But the background is pretty simple and the blocks all look pretty similar. Okay, so let's talk about how I have labeled these. We have the first number, that's the order, right? So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So you go this way, and then you go these 3, and you go these 3. Then you have a slash. The second number, that's the lightness or darkness of the color. So if we use these as an example, this would be a 1 and this would be a 10. So somewhere around here would be 5 or 6 would be the middle. So there's a few different things that are parts of how you describe a color, which I do have one other video about that I'll link below. So you have the lightness or darkness, and then you have the hue, which is where it is on the color wheel. So is it green? Is it yellow? Is it violet? And then you have the intensity of the hue. You see these are both green. This looks more green than that one. That one looks less green. If you look over at this, these two are very yellow. This one looks brown, but it is a brown that has a yellow undertone. This looks less yellow, so that's the intensity. One other thing that's really important to understand, though, when it comes to the intensity of a hue is how the darkness affects that. Each hue has a place where it's the brightest. So for example, yellow is a light color, so yellow will look the most yellow when you are above an 8. So let's say 8, 9, 10. Once you get down, even maybe 9, 10, once you get down into like 6s, yellow doesn't look yellow. It starts looking like mustardy. It starts looking yellow-brown. Blue, on the other hand, blue is a darker color. If we look at this one, these blues look really blue. This, well, this is technically a blue-green, but this starts looking a little less blue, and this also looks less blue. So blue is a darker color. So depending on what type of blue you're talking about, whether it's midnight blue or cobalt blue, blue is going to look the bluest in probably a range of like 3, 4, and 5. And then you have red, and red, if we look at which ones look the reddest, these look really red. Notice the lighter ones look pink, and if we find the darker reds, they start to look a little bit more red-violet or red-brown, more like brick. So red is the reddest, around a 6, 7. Let me give you an example for the yellows. If you look at these yellows, you can see that these look yellow. Most people, if you ask them if this was yellow, they'd say no, but this still has yellow. It's just because it's darker, it looks different. The way I like to think about how much you see tone in relation to how dark it is think about it like a room with a light on or a light off. If you are in a room where all the lights are on, you're going to see the colors really well. If you're in a room where the lights are dimmed, you're not going to see that hue as well. If you're in a room where the lights are off, you're not going to see it at all. So black or a 1, you got to think about that like that's like a room with the lights off. And a 10 is like when you're out in the sun and it's so bright that when you take pictures, they look overexposed. So you'll notice some of these that are labeled as really dark. So this says 2G. If you look at this little circle, it looks almost black. Now, if it wasn't this tiny circle, if you had a larger part to look at, you might be able to tell that there is some green to it, but it's so dark that you'll barely notice it. Now, how do I use this information to make decisions about colors? Something that has confused some people is that when I like to do these scrappy quilts, they are not designed for you to know exactly every color that's on the quilt and have a fabric for exactly every color. The idea is that you're given the colors that the design was designed with, and then you choose what matches that the best based on your fabric selection. So the kits that I set up have a good enough range of fabrics that you should be able to cover most of what you need, but you're still making decisions, right? So this involves a lot of making decisions. Let's look at some examples of green. First of all, here we have some greens that are darker, we have some greens that are lighter, you have some greens that have more blue, and then there is some greens that have more yellow. These greens have more yellow, and these greens have more blue. In this image, the reason for that is because this is, notice I'm gonna label at the bottom what part of the picture it is. So this is the Christmas tree with the lights. So the reason why this green looks more like yellow is because it's by a yellow light. And these greens look more blue-green because they're by a blue-violet light. So there is a reason for that. However, if you only had one type of greens, it's still gonna look great. So let's look at some examples of greens I have. So here are some green scraps that I have. Let's put these in order of darkest to lightest. So here, this one's pretty dark. This one's sort of a medium. That one's sort of in between those. And there's this one. Let's talk about some of the differences between these. First of all, some are darker and some are lighter. Secondly, these two have more blue. This one has more yellow. This one has more blue. This one has a lot of neutral in it. It's kind of like a muted green. Other things to notice that this has colors other than green. We have some blue and we have some pink. A lot of times you can still get away with that. I used this in the background of the tree frog, and you're looking at overall. If overall it's mostly green, it'll probably work fine. But if that makes you nervous, you can stick with only the ones that are totally monochromatic. This one also, it has some blue and it has some green, but there's enough of those two colors in there that from far away, your eyes will sort of blend it and it'll look blue-green. And that's one of the secrets to these type of quilts, is that your eyes mix colors when you have a lot of little colors. So that's why this works. Now this is my darkest green. I would not say that it's a 2. One thing you can do, you could lay your fabric here by this square and take a picture of it and put a black and white filter on it, and that'll tell you if this is like the same darkness. I wouldn't do that with every piece. That would take a long time, but that's just a good trick. This says it's 2G. This is probably a 3 or 4, honestly. This is probably more like this one, 4BG. However, if this is the darkest green you had, that'll still work. You just have to keep in mind that if this is gonna be your darkest, then if you have other dark colors in the background, you should probably not go darker in the other hues as well. So if this is the darkest green you have, and so your darkest is gonna be a 4, maybe the ones that are 2 and 3, you're just also gonna do a 4, which would totally work. Then you wouldn't wanna go way darker with your browns. The biggest thing is that you want your quilt to be consistent with your quilt. So let's say you're like, I don't have any blue greens, I only have regular greens or yellow greens. So everything that's green, I'm just gonna do it yellow green. That'll be fine as long as you do that consistently. You can put the fabric next to the little circle and just eyeball it, or you can look at the number and the hue to make that decision. Let's say you bought one of the kits from me. What I would do is I would undo this and I would lay them out. I would number them, what I think they are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This is more than 10, right? So you, like these probably would both be 10. These probably would both be 9. And then you can print out the grayscale in the pattern, and you can lay these fabrics by the grayscale and then take a picture and put a black and white filter on it and see if it lines up. And then once you have those, then you just know, okay, any grays, any 9 grays, this is my 9 gray. Any 10 grays, these are my 10 gray. Or if you got a bunch of crazy scraps like I do and they're not super organized as I get is, here's a bin of medium to dark greens. And I just sort of dig through it. And that can work too. If you're good at either, you're good at eyeballing it, or you just get an idea after a while of what these numbers mean. So like 2 is almost black, 3, 4, and 5 are medium to dark. Once you get into 6 and 7, you're medium but going towards lighter, and once you get to 8, 9, and 10, you're light, right? One other thing I want to point out is when it comes to things that are more neutral, color wheel shows the tones, which are like the rainbow, like red, yellow, orange, blue, violet, right? But then we have browns and grays. And browns and grays are what you usually consider neutral. They're sort of like in the middle, like they contain all of the colors. They're not particularly one color or another. And the reason why I call them browns and grays instead of just all neutrals is because if you look at this gray and this brown, they definitely look different. So I would say grays look a little cooler and browns look a little warmer. So the way I've labeled that is if it's a GA, that means that's a cool neutral. And if it's an N, that means that's a more brownish or tan or peach or warm neutral. So let's pick out some examples. Here's some examples of fabrics that we could use for some of these. 6G, that's like a medium green. We could do this one, that's sort of like a bright green. I also have this batik. But right next to this, we have an 8 yellow green. So this is gonna have more yellow than green. So this would be an example of a fabric I could use for that. Now 6 NG, so 6 is medium, N is neutral, and G is green. So this is saying it's a more muted. N means it's more muted. So here are some examples of more muted greens as compared to a brighter green. These also have a little bit more yellow to them. And then here we have a 5N. This is an example of something we could possibly use for a neutral. And then if we look at our yellows, we have 310 yellows. Now 10 is like almost white. So I have this yellow, which could totally work for that, although I would say technically this is probably a 9. And then I have this yellow where it's actually white and really light yellow. So from far away, it's gonna look like a really pastel type yellow. So this would be a good one for those. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, why are there these neutrals? So if this is a Christmas tree that's green, and this is a Christmas light that's yellow, why is there brown? Like I was saying with this one where I'm saying the greens look more bluish because the light is blue, the reason why you have some neutrals is because that's the yellow light sort of fading into the green. If you were to choose to not do neutrals and just do yellow and green, that also would work. I know I'm probably giving you too many options. So the first few weeks is going to be a little easier because all the blocks are pretty much going to be the same in the order you do them in. We know we're doing the tree and the background lights. So you could get away with some really bright and crazy colors here, whereas when we start getting into Santa's face and skin, you probably are going to want to be a little pickier about what you use. Also, this is the 5-inch block. So this is printed at 100%. This is the 5-inch block. This is the 2-inch block. Notice I didn't put the colors on this one, but you can reference these if you need to. If you want to do, so this is going to give you an 80 by 80. And this is going to give you more of a like wall hanging size. So if you print this at 80%, that'll give you a 4-inch block. So you can play around with the size. Just keep one thing in mind. If you change the size of the block and you print it at a different size, that's going to change the size of this seam allowance. So if you print it at 80%, make sure that you use a ruler to trim the seam allowance because the seam allowance in the picture will not be correct. I understand why when I do quilt-alongs or when I create patterns, people really want to know exact amount of fabric, exact color choices, even what I would recommend as color choices. I understand that, but this pattern is really designed for choice. It's designed for you to make choices based on what you have. Whether that is grabbing a bag of scraps and digging through until you find something that matches the swatch, or taking all the greens you have and sort of putting it in a row from darkest to lightest and maybe giving them numbers so that you can choose from that. But the exciting thing is that that means everyone's quilt's gonna look different. Even if you buy the starter kit, your quilt could still end up looking a little different than someone else who bought the starter kit depending on how you decide to organize the fabric. I'm really excited about this quilt along. It is going to be a long quilt along. It's going to be a little over a year. It's going to be the longest one that I've done so far. But I'm really excited about seeing how this picture turns out and how it turns out different for different people. I hope that that description helped. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to email me or post in the Facebook group or comment below. One other thing that I want to say is that I would say that this is probably going to be beginner leading toward advanced pattern. If you have not done foundation paper piecing and you want to do this pattern, I think that's wonderful. I have a class that you can take. Check out Cole'sQuiltsAcademy.com for a beginning foundation paper piecing class that includes a little pattern and walks you through all the basic things that you need to know about foundation paper piecing. So Merry Christmas in July and happy quilting.